The First Tale. Long ago, the monster said, before this was a town with roads and trains and cars, it was a green place. Trees covered every hill and bordered every path. They shaded every stream and protected every house, for there were houses here, even then, made of stone and earth. This was a kingdom. What? Connor said, looking around his backyard. Here? The monster cocked its head at him curiously. You have not heard of it? Not a kingdom here, no, Connor said. We don't even have a McDonald's. Nevertheless, continued the monster, it was a kingdom, small but happy, for the king was just a king, a man whose wisdom was born out of hardship. His wife had given birth to 4 strong sons, but in the king's reign he had been forced to ride into battles to preserve the peace of his kingdom. Battles against giants and dragons, battles against black wolves with red eyes, battles against armies of men led by great wizards. These battles secured the kingdom's borders and brought peace to the land. But victory came at a price. One by one, the king's 4 sons were killed. By the fire of a dragon, or the hands of a giant, or the teeth of a wolf, or the spear of a man. One by one, all 4 princes of the kingdom fell, leaving the king only one heir, his infant grandson. This is all sounding pretty fairy tale-ish, Connor said suspiciously. You would not say that if you heard the screams of a man killed by a spear, said the monster, or his cries of terror as he was torn to pieces by wolves. Now be quiet. By and by, the king's wife succumbed to grief, as did the mother of the young prince. The king was left with only the child for company, along with more sadness than one man should bear alone. I must remarry, the king decided, for the good of my prince and of my kingdom, if not for myself. And remarry he did to a princess from a neighboring kingdom, a practical union that made both kingdoms stronger. She was young and fair, and though perhaps her face was a bit hard and her tongue a bit sharp, she seemed to make the king happy. Time passed. The young prince grew until he was nearly a man, coming within 2 years of the 18th birthday that would allow him to ascend to the throne on the old king's death. These were happy days for the kingdom. The battles were over, and the future seemed secure in the hands of the brave young prince. But one day the king grew ill. Rumor began to spread that he was being poisoned by his new wife. Stories circulated that she had conjured grave magics to make herself look far younger than she actually was, and beneath her youthful face lurked the scowl of an elderly hag. No one would have put it past her to poison the king, though he begged his subjects until his dying breath not to blame her. And so he died, with still a year left before his grandson was old enough to take the throne. His queen, his step-grandmother, became regent in his place, and would handle all affairs of state until the prince was old enough to take over. At first, to the surprise of many, her reign was a good one. Her countenance, despite the rumors, was still youthful and pleasing, and she endeavored to carry on, ruling in the manner of the dead king. The prince, meanwhile, had fallen in love. I knew it, Connor grumbled. These kinds of stories always have stupid princes falling in love. He started walking back to the house. I thought this was going to be good. With one swift movement, the monster grabbed Connor's ankles in a long, strong hand and flipped him upside down, holding him in midair so his t-shirt rucked up and his heartbeat thudded in his head. As I was saying, said the monster, the prince had fallen in love. She was only a farmer's daughter, but she was beautiful and also smart, as the daughters of farmers need to be, for farms are complicated businesses. The kingdom smiled on the match. The queen, however, did not. She had enjoyed her time as regent and felt a strange reluctance to give it up. She began to think that perhaps it was best that the crown remained in the family, that the kingdom be run by those wise enough to do it. And what could be a better solution than for the prince to actually marry her? That's disgusting, Connor said, still upside down. She was his grandmother. Step-grandmother, corrected the monster. Not related by blood, and to all intents and appearances, a young woman herself. Connor shook his head, his hair dangling. That's just wrong. He paused a moment. Can you maybe put me down? The monster lowered him to the ground and continued the story. The prince also thought marrying the queen was wrong. He said he would die before any such thing. He vowed to run away with the beautiful farmer's daughter and return on his 18th birthday to free his people from the tyranny of the queen. And so one night, the prince and the farmer's daughter raced away on horseback, stopping only at dawn to sleep in the shade of a giant yew tree. You? Connor asked. Me, the monster said, but also only part of me. I can take any form of any size, but the yew tree is a shape most comfortable. The prince and the farmer's daughter held each other close in the growing dawn. They had vowed to be chaste until they were able to marry in the next kingdom. But their passions got the better of them, and it was not long before they were asleep and naked in each other's arms. They slept through the day in the shadows of my branches, and night fell once again. The prince awoke. Arise, my beloved, he whispered to the farmer's daughter, for we ride to the day where we will be man and wife. But his beloved did not wake. He shook her, and it was only as she slumped back in the moonlight that he noticed the blood staining the ground. Blood? Connor said, but the monster kept talking. The prince also had blood covering his own hands, and he saw a bloodied knife on the grass beside them, resting against the roots of the tree. Someone had murdered his beloved and done so in a way that made it look like the prince had committed the crime. The queen, cried the prince. The queen is responsible for this treachery. In the distance, he could hear villagers approaching. If they found him, they would see the knife and the blood, and they would call him murderer. They would put him to death for his crime. And the queen would be able to rule unchallenged, Connor said, making a disgusted sound. I hope this story ends with you ripping her head off. There was nowhere for the prince to run. His horse had been chased away while he slept. The yew tree was his only shelter, and also the only place he could turn for help. Now, the world was younger then. The barrier between things was thinner, easier to pass through. The prince knew this, and he lifted his head to the great yew tree, and he spoke. The monster paused. What did he say? Connor asked. He said enough to bring me walking, the monster said. I know injustice when I see it. The prince ran toward the approaching villagers. The queen has murdered my bride, he shouted. The queen must be stopped. The rumors of the queen's witchery had been circulating long enough, and the young prince was so beloved of the people that it took very little for them to see the obvious truth. It took even less time when they saw the great green man walking behind him, high as the hills, coming for vengeance. Connor glanced again at the monster's massive arms and legs, at its raggedy, toothy mouth, at its overwhelming monstrousness. He imagined what the queen must have thought when she saw it coming. He smiled. The subjects stormed the queen's castle with such fury that the stones of its very walls tumbled. Fortifications fell and ceilings collapsed. And when the queen was found in her chambers, the mob seized her and dragged her to the stake right then to burn her alive. Good, Connor said, smiling. She deserved it. He looked up at his bedroom window where his grandmother slept. I don't suppose you can help me with her? He asked. I mean, I don't want you to burn her alive or anything, but maybe just. The story, said the monster, is not yet finished.